Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's episode of Dr. G's Think Tank on Resilience. This month, I wanted to talk about something that I have experienced with 3 of my clients in the last year, and that is mergers and acquisitions. What happens when a company is absorbing another company or merging with another company, but also what happens when merger and acquisition like experiences happen within businesses? What do I mean by that? For example, when 2 departments get merged, or when one leadership team member says, hey, our team is taking on part of the portfolio of that team. When someone who's crucial to your organization is going to be out on leave for illness or family issues or sabbatical, whatever it is. Mergers and acquisitions happen all the time. We take work that had been done by a vendor and bring it into the company. We take work that some part of the company was doing inside and say, hey, we could outsource this. And all of these are designed to make the company faster, smarter, stronger, and at the same time, often cause individuals and teams to feel exactly the opposite. I am joined today by 2 incredible guests, and I want to first introduce you to Meg Dietzel. Meg is the Chief Marketing Officer at Confluent Health. She is known inside the organization for crafting and executing marketing strategies and amplifying the company's market presence and forging strong healthcare partnerships. Listen to this, aligning 50 plus brands under a unified and effective go-to-market strategy. Lots and lots of organizations that I'm guessing think of themselves as their own company, a different business, actually all needing to work and act as one. At the core of her work is a deep-seated ability to navigate complex environments and spearhead initiatives that lead to significant growth and make the company more competitive. Her track record is marked by her previous senior leadership positions at Patterson Dental and the U.S. Air Force. At Patterson, Meg initiated and developed a unique customer acquisition program executed across the entire business. And in her time serving in the US Air Force, she led her team in support of the largest counter IED operation with a 98% mission accuracy rating. She ended her time in the military supporting the 4-star general of US Pacific Command in planning and executing, I'm going to see if I can get this right, bilateral international discussions with leaders from 19 countries. That's quite the merger. I was lucky enough to meet Meg in a professional capacity just a few months ago. And Meg, I'm delighted that you're here today. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So Meg, let me start off by asking you a straightforward question.
Sure.
How much do you see mergers and acquisitions taking a toll on the resilience of the people that are involved?
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I love this conversation. I would say the size of the toll is directly related to the perception of the transparency. So oftentimes people think they're being transparent, but it truly is the perception of the team of that transparency. And I think, M&A, we are 50 brands. We've grown a lot through mergers and acquisitions. And, the structure of the transaction is financial. And so that really has to stay very close knit with, 1, 3, maybe 5 people. But after the transaction is made, the value is almost immediately impacted by that human transition and how much was that thought of and planned for. So I'll pause. I know you have another introduction to make. I could talk about this. I'm excited.
I do, and I will want to come back to, you can't be transparent about everything, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're in the military or in the business world, I'm sure that you're not saying everything's got to be out for everyone to see. So I really do want us to talk about how can you assure people of your strategic transparency or your vision and goals. Let's try a little bit later on to name what are we transparent about and how do we prove that and how does it help? So Before we do that, I'd really like to introduce Joseph Henlon. Joe's an accomplished corporate attorney. He's based in Cleveland, and he practices nationally with a focus on mergers and acquisitions. Also private equity, which is a lot about acquisitions, venture capital, healthcare-related transactions. He's an attorney at Ice Miller LLP, and he counsels clients on a wide range of corporate matters, including private equity acquisitions and divestitures, especially in healthcare, with deep experience in long-term care and senior housing. And if you know anything about the healthcare industry, you know that there's been incredible flux in those industries, especially since COVID, but even before. Before joining Ice Miller, he practiced business law at other prominent national firms. He earned his JD from Case Western Reserve, and he clerked for a federal judge. Is that right?
That's correct. I
Yeah.
was an extern. I was still in law school. I wasn't an attorney yet.
That's cool. So prior to law school, Joe lived in Israel and served as a paratrooper in the Israel Defense Forces. I'm really interested to see how Joe and Meg's military experience informs their strategy around mergers and acquisitions, because there's so much thought given in the weeds and in the clouds when you're dealing with military strategy and with military personnel about how they interact, who's in charge, and what they're responsible for. Joe, thank you so much for meeting me through a mutual friend and doing this conversation today really sight unseen. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you for having me.
So, Joe, I'm going to start off by asking you the same first question. How much do you, from your vantage point, see mergers and acquisitions taking a toll on the resilience of the people who are involved?
It takes quite a toll. Obviously, I like what Meg had to say about this. There's cases where it works out really well in the transition in a acquisition or merger, and there's other times where it doesn't go so great, and sometimes it starts out rocky and improves over time. But I really like what Meg said about the correlation of transparency with how well it ultimately goes. I think that ultimate transparency is a result of communication, ultimate strategy about goals in the business. What are they trying to do? Understanding that not everything they want to do is possible right up front. I like to think of sometimes these problems as Jenga towers, and you don't want to pull out too many pieces at once. You want to go incremental and kind of see how things go. A lot of people are frequent M&A enthusiasts, and they'll buy a lot of businesses. They know their stuff, and like Meg said, it's very financial, so they're very good at that element of the business, and they want to just go the second they get in. But it takes time to kind of reflect and treat each business and each situation as its own unique beast, and really go step by step and listen to feedback and see what you can do to prevent turnover in your workforce.
I heard someone who was being acquired by a private equity firm say that they'd been approached by two different private equity firms. And I said, how did you decide? And he said, one of them seemed to approach acquisitions like those people who buy unmarked boxes from Amazon to resell. I'll just take in as much volume as I can, see what I get, do the best I can. He said, and the other person, the other group, but the person we were dealing with really made us feel, and he said, and maybe it's not true, but they really made us feel like they were intentional. They chose us. And I think that it speaks, Meg, to what you brought up about transparency. But I want to ask you a question. I'm going to push back and say, is it possible that when you say transparency, part of really what you're talking about is not total transparency, but trust, building trust?
Yes, and I would say, so transparency, I don't mean that it's like laying out the financial sheet and this is what we sold for and this is share, there are certain people that need to know that and will know.
Everyone can have the logins to all of our financial accounts.
Yeah. It's really about, I find that most people just focus on, well, what does this mean for me? And sometimes it's, what does this mean for me and my team? And so it's being as transparent as possible to answering those 1 to 2 questions that are on everybody's mind. And also it's being willing to say, we don't know. We're still working through the details on X. So the other thing I think that creates this information vacuum is that when it hasn't been figured out, oftentimes folks will say nothing. And then people start making all kinds of assumptions, and this means we're all getting fired, and this means this huge thing is changing, when maybe that is absolutely not what's occurring. It hasn't been figured out. No one's planning on thinking about it for 3 months from now, so we're just not saying anything about it. And then you get this, all of this spin that wouldn't have occurred if we had been transparent up front on the things that folks are concerned about. Phasing of the project. What does it mean for their job? So I hear you. I do think there's a level of transparency that is necessary out of the gate just to help people understand what is actually happening here. We found here, we're buying, smaller companies that this is the one time they've ever done it, the only time they may ever do it. And so there's a lot of learning that has to go on what this actually means.
And if it's the only time, almost by definition, what they came from was a small business based either geographically or familially in one family or one small group of people that started. In your case, it's practices, right? Occupational therapy and physical therapy practices, right?
Yes.
And so that probably started as a small business, like we think of, Small Business Saturday. And most people knowing everyone doesn't mean they like everyone, but the devil is often less scary than the devil you don't. Joe, you said something in your answer to my first question, and we'll get to my big question, I promise, but I just wanted to ask about this. You said some start rocky and get better, but I think actually that some of the drop in resilience around mergers and acquisitions are before they even have a chance to get started. Meaning, as soon as you know it's a possibility that this is going to happen, whether you are I think even in most mergers, tell me if I'm wrong, please, but I think that one of the two is bigger, right? There is if it's not a parent child kind of size, it's at least a big brother, little brother kind of size, that there's one's perceived to have more power or more weight than the other. Am I right about that in most situations?
It's probably true. I would say in most cases there's someone with more negotiating power where they're a bigger company, or they're directing a lot of change, or there could be a lot of items where there's just one key investor with a whole pool of investors and they have an outsized impact, or there's a particular executive who has a particular opinion on how things are going to be run. But um, ultimately there's certain things that can be done even before the deal is consummated. Obviously, during due diligence, and when you sign a letter of intent, that's like the first part of an M&A deal. When there's still an option that it may not happen, it may not be consummated, the whole transaction. So it may not be the time to go to employees and tell them, hey, we're the new people on the block, when you haven't even entered into those final stages before closing. But when possible, when the opportunity allows it, we always counsel clients to say, hey, take a moment to find a way to connect, or have the current owners reach out, or just kind of show some sort of, not just collaboration between the sellers and the buyers, but at least some sort of note from new management, or something to kind of cue people in on the process, as opposed to what Meg was discussing, which is a lot of that, we're not getting any information. We're just going to be told on closing day that the keys are changing, or the day before closing, telling them what's happening, and then they know there was a closing, but they don't know exactly the terms of that, and then people are worried everyone's going to get terminated or whatnot. And so one more thing, which is that often in deals there's always like a negotiation for key employees. It's very frequent in private equity. There's key executives, the one employee who knows exactly how to deal with this unique particular material that the company makes, or whatnot, or a salesperson who has the important Rolodex. And beyond those key employees, which are part of like the contracts they deal with, I think there's all the other key employees, and obviously there might be terminations or people who are just not eating the business, but there's a lot of people who it means a lot to make a connection with them, have a one-on-one feedback session, do a town hall, do something where people are brought in, and this might be part of the process post closing. But it's definitely good to bring in as many people as possible, get their insight, to be a little bit flexible with what people are doing, and at what stage certain changes are implemented.
Okay, that's really useful. And our main question, and I want to get to that, is how can companies strengthen the resilience of staff that are impacted? And I said that particularly staff that are impacted because it's not only in the company that's being acquired, it might also be in the management company side of it. Or if we're talking about departments that are moving together, everyone is experiencing change. So Meg, so far, Joe's named a couple of strategies. Have you tried those? What have you seen work? What do you like, not like?
Yeah, well, I mean, he said communication. I mean, I can't oversay that word. So I'm a CMO, but I have marketing and communication within my team. So it's communications at all level, right? So it's supporting the CEO and how he or she may want to talk about it. It's your mid-level managers. It's all the way down to coaching around one-on-ones. I mean, it sounds so simple, but things like don't cancel your one-on-ones during this time. Make sure you're need with your team. And you're leading visibly and authentically. I think when you get into post, deal closure, integrations can feel like a second job. And so it is your nature to be like, I'm too busy, but this is the time to not be too busy, to have your one-on-ones, connect with employees. And then you kind of go up into the broader communications on, we're purposeful about having marketing and comms together. Market the wins. I think oftentimes people hear PE and M&A and oh, that's bad and that's scary, and there's so many good things that come with a merger and acquisition. And so it's really leaning into that. And on the marketing side of the house, we have this whole arsenal of, if we were doing a product launch, what would we do? We do videos, we do scripting, we do FAQs. You can treat M&A and use some of those same tools and strategies to help people see and understand the vision. Why did we make this transition? If you're the company being acquired, why did I choose to do that? And then if you're the company acquiring them, like, who's coming here? Who do we get? What is this thing? And why should we care? Why should we be excited about it?
Joe, when you said you want to have that initial communication as early in the process as possible, and I am thinking about internal changes in companies as well, because when there's legal involved in companies that are merging or being acquired, often there's times where you're not allowed to say anything yet. And yet the people in both companies, but especially the company that is being acquired, they feel something in the air. We are all really pretty hyper vigilant about change. So we'll see something almost said in a meeting, right? Somebody be like, what? Whatever. So when, we'll be like, wait, what was that? What was the not said thing? Or we'll see that the timeline on which our small company normally does budgets has been pushed off, and be like, well, is that because we're getting bought? People are hyper vigilant for any sign of change. But when you're doing internal company changes, often the timeline is much more up to you, the timeline of communication, of marketing. And so, Joe, when you said whenever they can, you'd like to see the leadership reach out, I want to ask you a very granular question. What would you recommend they talk about in that first reach out? Is it about the why? Like, what problem is this going to solve? Or is it, to Meg's point, that you want to say, you can go talk to your supervisor about how your team is affected, and really try to lay out the question that everyone's first question is, what about me? Because that's how our brains keep us safe. What do you recommend they focus on during that initial communication?
That's a good question. I think it depends. I think being open-minded with those types of questions and allowing an open space for someone to say, hey, here are my problems that I've had long-standing in my current job, or here are my fears looking forward. Those are good ways to kind of start a discussion. I think really listening is probably the key part of this. And the second key part is the follow-up and actually tracking what people are saying and doing something about it. And if you can really deliver a little bit, if someone says, if you do an hour one-on-one and someone lists you all their problems they had with the prior employer, and, well, I'm scared I'm going to be terminated, I'm scared that I'm going to be given everyone else's work, and it's, this isn't going to work right, I don't have the right tools to do my job, et cetera, et cetera. And then you say, hey, listen, what tools would work for you? Or, what do you think is the maximum amount that you could actually do in this particular period? What's a good metric? What are your thoughts? And then you come back and you say, hey, listen, I know we talked about X, Y, and Z because I kept good notes. I was able to change this one thing. What do you think about that? And then, you've already beaten like 90% of management when you can do something like that effectively. And it's really hard to do. And it is a full-time job, but that is the key, to make people feel like they matter. Their concerns are not, minimal. They're not nothing. It is significant. And from kind of a cold-hearted, financial point of view, it really kills a deal when you lose 50% of your workforce or something like that in the first year. So there is a real financial incentive to not ignore these problems, even though it's a more, EQ type of way of addressing the problem. So it does overlap that initial financial assessment of, we're buying a business, we like these metrics, we could really use their IP or whatever it is, but then moving that into management strategies and how you're really going to run the business, both on a day-to-day or interpersonal level, and how you want to weave that into long-term. You make people happy in their job and see that, their main pain points are being addressed.
Yeah, can I jump on that? What Joe said triggered something for me, that, when these transactions happen, 95, 99% of the company had no say in it, right? This is just a very small group that made that decision. And so the reaction can be, this was done to me, I have no control. And I think level setting on what they do have control over, going back to just kind of some management 101 on, let's look at your OKRs. What are your goals and priorities? Perhaps none of that is changing, or it isn't even being changed for 6 months from now. But going back to what do you actually have control over? It's actually quite a lot. And I need you to focus on all of these things that you are already leading or managing or trying to move forward for us. And kind of quells the panic that happens when it's like, oh my gosh, this was done to me.
And so that's an excellent point to remind people what they do have agency over. And also, I hear in that, Meg, some advice to point out to people what hasn't changed when, and that's not always true, but when the OKRs or the goals haven't changed. And that segues nicely into a question that we got from someone who's with us today, who said, post acquisition, in that integration period, what about core values that drive the culture of the acquired company? How would you suggest handling core values within that new company, or if you're folding a department into another department? And if they have different stated core values initially, are you trying to merge them? Are you trying to basically do just say, well, you have to have the parent company's values now, or is there a merging process there too? Meg, what have you guys done?
Yeah, it's such a great question. We've wrestled and discussed this, and I think where I sit on this is I think people want this either or. Like I can wear one logo on my chest. Which one should it be? And we're a house of brands intentionally. So you work for a one particular brand, but your paycheck and your HR and your benefits come from another particular brand. And we worked hard to say it actually can be both, right? A name, it doesn't have to mean that your culture completely shifts. And I realize this isn't true for all companies, but the way we've handled it is to say, we're not here to rip out all of the culture and the great things that have made you great for the last 30 years, 40 years. And we're purposeful about what stays the same. And if they have, these three core values that they all speak and talk about, like, we're not here to take those away. What we're going to do though is layer in on top kind of what are we doing as an enterprise? What are our values as an enterprise? What's our mission and our vision and all of those really important things? And then sometimes they don't. Sometimes they haven't spent any time on that. So it's really easy to adopt, like, oh, this feels good. Now I know what our employee value prop is. They won't use those words, but what are the actual values of the organization? And they're easy to adopt. That being said, in their local community, they still show up as their brand. They're very proud of it. And we want them to keep that pride in their brand. And they can have, you can have culture from both brands, one company, both brands.
Which I think in interior mergers, when I'm asking two departments to start working together as one team, or I'm folding one group of people under a leader that because their leader left or something, that might actually be harder internally. If you say, well, we've always been if, for example, for you, corporate communications and marketing didn't used to all be under one vertical, and now you say they are. I've worked with a lot of corporate communications groups that very proudly have their own team brand, and marketing certainly thinks about their team brand. And if they say, we want to keep ours, it is a question of saying, how are we going to layer it? How are we going to weave it together so we are working as one team? Whereas I think actually, if you're wearing your logo in your community, it might even be easier to be in the larger setting to be an acquired company. Joe, do you see from your vantage point, even in negotiations, do people talk about mission, vision, values in that, or is it really all finances? Like they talk about key employees. Do they also talk about values?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the industry. It depends on the situation. If we're dealing with a more family-owned business or just a smaller business where there was like a lot of tight control by the management, how everything's been shaped and developed, they might have more opinions about the real mission, or even on a bigger scale too. There's concerns about mission, but I just think it varies a lot. And often, despite whatever the leadership of a business might say what their mission is, that's not always felt by the employees. So there might be a disconnect, even if, the leadership is saying, hey, we really value X, Y, and Z, or whatever it is important to us. If the employees feel disconnected, and that might be one reason why they're trying to get out of their business, or whatever the case may be. So there's always an opportunity for the new leadership coming in to make things better, to listen to people, to figure out and align what they want to do with the business, big picture, and then figure out what's possible with the people who are already there, are going to help them execute that vision. And there's going to be a give and take. There's going to be a balance. And if you want to call that, their mission or their values or whatnot, that's not really part of a purchase agreement negotiation. It just really isn't. Mm-hmm. But there are synergies that are considered broad picture in terms of, hey, are we rolling up this business under one brand? Are we going to have multiple individual brands, and this isn't going to be like part of our overarching company in terms of how it's marketed and run? So there's a lot of different considerations that could go both ways, but it does really go back to not just trying to like shovel change and force it, but really taking a nuanced approach.
Well, and it occurs to me that in those early conversations you were recommending where you listen to employees, one of the questions you could ask is, what are the values that you feel the company has lived that you really connect to, that fuel your work here, especially in more service related industries like healthcare and those kind of things, where I can tell you as an employee of a federally qualified health center, it's often not for the paycheck. That's not going to be enough. You could earn more in a retail position or in the widget company. So asking people their why of how they connected. Meg, after the fact, after the merger's been announced or the acquisition is happening, Bruce asked, how can you strategically and transparently care for the individuals in a company if they're not one of those negotiated key employees?
But they're still part of the company, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but you don't want to get rid of them, right? You don't want them to leave. They're not somebody, because I think it happens in a lot of companies that they're like, well, there's a few people who'll be very resistant, and if they leave, we'll be sorry to see them go, but that may happen. But if you're saying, there's a lot of people here, we really want to care for them and help them feel that transparently, that how you talked about, one of the first things you have to do is show that transparently, yes, we understand that your job matters to you, you matter to us. What are some strategic things people can do to drive that message home in a way that people believe?
Yeah, that's where I would say like your field leaders or mid-level managers, making sure they're on stable footing and have a good understanding. They're not translating their anxiety and concerns onto their team. I think it depends on where you are in the organization, but sometimes we've done this where you kind of over-index, like folks aren't actually that worried about it. And so you want to make sure that you're communicating and then making sure your mid-level managers are really well prepared and they feel confident about it so they can field some of the questions. And then I would say measure it. Like if there's ever a time to measure employee sentiment or employee engagement to kind of see where everybody is, this is the time to do it. We've learned sometimes we've paced the change or we've communicated too much too fast, and the incoming company is like, whoa, they're still getting all their communication from their original company and the new one. And so, pacing that in effort to be transparent, communicate, it can be overwhelming. And so we've pulled back on, okay, here's the actual phasing of the communication. And we learn that just by measuring it and asking the questions, and 90 days in, how are you feeling about things? And learn, and then, kind of evolve and pivot as needed.
I hesitate to say this to a communications professional, but most people don't read most emails. So when you just see a waterfall of emails in your inbox, your brain says, uh-oh, something terrible must be happening.
Right. Very fair. Yeah.
And I really take your point about don't assume what they're worried about or how worried they are, but instead, to Joe's point, ask. It occurs to me that when I have seen leadership change in organizations that I've been a part of, we think people are like, oh, they're worried for their jobs, they're worried for their workload, when somebody's question might simply be, is the PTO policy going to change? Right? Are the new leaders going to take more of the parking spots in the parking lot? Sometimes it's really just about discomfort. We speak on the think tank a lot about how when there's a change, our brain has these 3 safety mechanisms. What will I lose that's crucial for my safety, for my ability to take care of my family, whatever? Do I trust this, right? We have a knee-jerk distrust when there's a change, that What if I do lose my job? What if the new people don't care about me like I perceived the old person did? What if we can't serve our community, or we aren't as successful, or our sales drop? And then lastly, just discomfort. What's going to be uncomfortable? And sometimes that's where people are. And if you can assure them, we're making no HR policy changes in the first 6 months, so everybody can take a breath. Joe, you mentioned Jenga, and I love that image. I may take that from you when I speak about this, because when people play Jenga and they have to take something out, what they do normally is hold their breath, pull it out, watch to see if it falls, and then exhale. And that's often how we think we should navigate change most safely. I'm going to hold my breath and try to be as steady as I can. And it's going to be very, very short, right? I don't have to hold my breath for a really long time, but I can't exhale until I see that everything looks like it's structurally sound, that it's okay. And that is an exhausting way to go through your workday or your work life. And it makes you less healthy to grit your teeth, hold your breath, hope and pray that it doesn't fall apart, and then only exhale when you think it's not changed significantly. Because so much of work is about change. We can approach it instead like we approach exercise, like do the reps, breathe through the reps, don't hold your breath, keep breathing, keep lifting, build the muscle. Then actually people end up stronger, better leaders, more effective employees, like their work and their life better. But you're right. I think a lot of people look at this like Jenga. Bruce asks, how do you balance the listening required with the leading necessary to move forward? And he says with the merger, but I think this is a good question about any leadership decision. So Joe, you've talked a lot about listening and how important that is. I totally agree. When people give you an answer, then being curious and asking follow-up questions before you try and make a move. Have you seen people get stuck too far on one side or the other of that balance?
I think so. I think a good executive, or good middle management is going to communicate what they're gonna know ultimately what's needed from the business. And I feel more often the case is people will voice their complaints, or maybe their complaints are not voiced, but it's palpable, or people are aware of them, indicated in some way, and nothing is done about it. And of course, everyone else is tunnel visioned on getting their metrics taken care of, and achieving objectives for whatever the business is. But I have a personal anecdote, which was when I worked at a very large firm previously, and we had a partner in charge who would really speak directly to everyone at the firm, and also talk to all the attorneys in different practice groups before a merger. And there were a lot of mergers that were going on. We were absorbing a lot of other firms, and he would go out of his way to really artfully, it's the mark of someone who's just a good communicator as well, but really just talk to people plainly and say, here's what's going on. I've heard a lot of people want this or that. It's not happening. It's not going to work. I'll tell you why this won't work. What we can do is this, but we don't want to lie to you. It doesn't fit our business model for what we're trying to do. And if you have a problem with that, you could let me know. But those types of conversations are appreciated in terms of being candid, because it goes back to our first thing about transparency, which is that sometimes people don't know what is up for grabs. Sometimes things are just better said, and just being honest about it, because when people feel like you're hiding the ball, that's when problems arise. But when you have a really blunt, direct conversation that isn't insulting or too aggressive, but just very blunt, and you just say, here's what we can do, here's just what we can't, and it's just not happening, but we're going to try to wiggle on other things and be flexible where we can, given what you've stated. People appreciate that, and they respect it. And they might say, well, I disagree, this or that. But then things the dust settles after that, as opposed to people not knowing when certain elements are in flux because they've never been discussed. But it's how you bring it up, how you actually address the matter. And definitely from when it comes on high, that's very helpful.
I agree. Transparency about what you're not going to get builds more trust than this sense that you're only telling me the things that you think I won't be mad at you about when you tell me. Meg, when you see resilience dropping, besides people quitting, what's an indicator to you that an acquisition is really taking a negative toll on an individual or a team?
Yeah, maybe two things. I mean, chatter, you just start to hear the chatter, and then you just see disengagement, which then can lead to people leaving and retention. But hopefully we're catching that early. Going back to kind of what Joe said, like I think it's important at time of transaction that the executives, the leaders are speaking to this. Like they're not hiding. They're like, this is what we're doing. This is the vision. This is the plan. But then you're really equipping your leaders to have the conversation because usually employees like, okay, that's great. CEO said this. Now, how do you
What does
feel
it mean?
about it?
Yeah, what does
And
it
what does
really
this
mean?
mean for me? And they want to know like their boss, the person they trust, the person they interact with the most, how do they feel about it? So it's that the listening and it needs to occur. I mean, we'll do CEO roundtables and things like that. So I'm not saying that executives don't need to do listening, but oftentimes it's those mid-level managers that are going to carry the weight of this transaction. And then an executive can lean in with, hey, is there anybody you need me to connect with? Is there somebody that you're really struggling with? And they can lean in there and have a conversation.
And so I wonder from what you just suggested, is there value in finding champions within the organization, people who are at that middle manager level, or even the trusted receptionist, right? The person who has been there a long time or seems to carry some of the culture on their shoulders. They're what we would call in the social sciences edge workers, the people look to who are at the leading edge of how do we feel about that? Are we okay? And getting those folks to be early adopters, to getting their questions answered, reassuring them, giving them some of the language that you're going to use. Have you seen that as a strategy that can be helpful?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And it's interesting. Our company, we're only 11 years old, so we're pretty young, but some of the companies we've acquired are 30, 40 years
Decades.
old.
Right.
And it's really interesting. We have some folks in the building that have been here the whole time, and that's exactly what people do. Like, so what do you think about this? You've been through the history of the company. So absolutely. And everybody knows the change curve. And I think knowing the people that whether they adopt change quicker and easier or they're just a sunny person that can find good in anything, and that they can have a good understanding of what's going on, and kind of be your eyes and ears out there and kind of evangelize this change. Absolutely is helpful.
Okay, so before we're done, I'd like to ask you both a question because you've worked in companies, but also observed a lot of other companies. And we've talked a fair amount about, we haven't always used the word, but we are talking about culture and that, how's the old culture impacted? What does the new culture look like when you merge two cultures there? It's like merging two, food colorings. They're not going to be exactly the same as when you started either one. And so what are the most successful culture enhancing strategies or traditions that you've seen that are somewhat merger proof, meaning that they can be adapted as teams grow and change? Who wants to take it?
I can take it. So I like the old adage that, and I don't know if it's true all the time, so it might hurt some feelings, but 30% of the people at a particular organization do 70% of the work or something along those lines. But there is truth to that in life, and specifically in business. It is important to find those irreplaceable people and to try to make them happy and to try to definitely listen to them as we discussed. Culture is important, but figure out what their expectations are in terms of culture, or at least use them as a weather vane for what is needed at large. The people who, in a particular department, who everyone turns to for this issue, or whether it's a receptionist or just someone who has a good pulse on stuff. What does it cost to just talk to them for a 15-minute quick check-in, once to just just get some information, see, does that corroborate things I've heard before? This person's one of our outstanding employees, and they're saying something that maybe I've heard before, but I never really paid attention to, or it's something that I've never heard, and now this is a really interesting thing to listen to. Maybe I should chase it down and see if it is true. So and middle management is often the place to go, depending on the size of the company. But middle management is often a lot of those people who they understand kind of what's going on at all levels. They have a good pulse on things, and it's really important to find those people, to talk to them. I like town halls are good, but sometimes it can be like a little it can go one way or another. I really love those, and this is just one thing, but I really like those polls where you get, you can select a couple bubbles, it's anonymous, and everyone can just say what they feel about a particular change. And then you can immediately, we look at life, we see in politics, or they ask people, what do you think about the economy or this or that? I think it's why I don't know why companies don't do it more. Just say, hey, quick survey. Do you like the idea if we change this or not? And if you have 85% of people saying do not get rid of it, then maybe you realize that, maybe if we get rid of Microsoft Office or, whatever the change is, it's going to make a lot of people unhappy, and it's not worth the cost, especially things that maybe changes that aren't something you thought were going to be a high cost thing to implement. You just
It seemed like a nothing burger to the leadership.
Correct.
And turned out to be a huge impact. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and especially in the first year before you have a good pulse on where things are with the business, I think those are great to do. Any type of thing where you're soliciting anonymous feedback and people can be candid. Obviously, you have to filter out people who might be overly critical or whatnot. But
Sure. But you're averaging it out.
Even then, yeah, and I might be guilty of being overly critical on those anonymous polls. But I will say that I think that's a great approach. Culture is really important, and it's a cliche, but if you want to, have a good culture company, it does have to start with you first, whether you're middle management or executive or whatever. You kind of have to lead by example and think, what can I do? And obviously that's unique to every situation, but it really is. It starts with you, and then it emanates outward in terms of your strategy and how other people are receiving it.
And that chatter that you mentioned, Meg, emanates for sure from those leading edge workers. Meg, is there anything that you've seen that you keep in mind as something that really makes a positive impact on culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be as simple as learning and understanding the culture of the company or the department that you're bringing in, and kind of what do they hold as valuable to them. So there is really no rip and replace of culture like there could be of tech and other things like that.
Yes.
That doesn't work. So it's learning those staples. I'll give you one example: employee recognition programs. That tends to be a sensitive topic, and if they have a program to tell them that that's going away now and here's your new program, can really knock people back. And the intent of a recognition program is positive. So we have layered on top of that. If they have a program that everyone's attached to, great, keep it. We're going to layer on top of what our program is as the enterprise, and you can do both. I mean, it's really choosing, what do we have to, the tech probably has to change usually. But these cultural pieces that people hold so close and valuable, that's where I think we can give a little, we can listen, and we can kind of compromise and figure out what makes sense for both organizations or teams.
I will say that in my own health center, when we got a new office manager, she sent out a quick, I don't know any of your traditions, so tell me 2 traditions you would definitely want to see us keep and one that you think is silly. And it was anonymous. Right. And I was unsurprised that soup day, where everybody brought in a crock pot of, not everyone, lots of people brought in a crock pot of a homemade soup, and everybody could go around and have soup for lunch and exchange recipes. Highly popular, which I was really pleased about because soup is my love language. I want to thank both of you very much for being here, and let everybody who's watching know that in April, I can't believe it's so excited that it's going to be spring, that at the end of April on the 28th, our next think tank is going to be about reputation resilience. When your company or organization has taken a hit or made a mistake and it's known, how do you keep your reputation resilient while letting your stakeholders know what's really going on?